you still can have someone pick up the phone, call someone else, and say that they are a different person and immediately have the trust of that other person, right? So this happened with MGM in 2023. The Jaguar attack that just happened cost Jaguar approximately £2 billion in like lost revenue.
Wow.
And like they had to get a government bailout. This happened like a couple months ago, or maybe a month and a half ago.
What happened?
The car
Peter?
manufacturer.
The car manufacturer.
Peter, can you tell our audience what happened?
I didn't hear about this.
So there's the details always get blurred by PR, by the company themselves. And in some cases because there's the fog of war that they actually don't understand what happened. But if I remember correctly, in this instance, this is the same group that went after Marks and Spencer and MGM in 2023. A really common tactic that they use is, they just call into the help desk.
Welcome to the Payments Experts Podcast, a podcast of Global Legal Law Firm. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Hey, it's nice to have you here. Like, the reason that I wanted to have you on is just a tiny bit of what I'm kind of seeing based on our conversation the last few minutes. But the thing for me and why I thought it was important and how it overlapped is I met Peter maybe 2 years ago. We were working on something.
I think more than that.
It might have been longer than that, totally.
Yeah.
And there was a purchase and sale of an ISO that had technology with it. And the funder of this had been using Peter for the kind of background on analyzing, auditing the technology that was coming along in the purchase and sale.
Yeah, that's right.
And I had never really thought about it, but then we talk on this podcast all the time about how payments has now become really technology and it's fintech.
Yes.
And then I saw in that application how important what you were doing was. Mm-hmm. And then getting to talk to you, you're really easy to talk to. Peter's also a UCSD alumnus, which I came to find out.
That's correct. Yeah, I think that was like the second time we talked on the phone. I was like, why is it so easy to talk to Chris? Is this like we're just automatically just having
Tritons, baby.
Yeah, exactly. Just like it's immediately a vibe. Yeah.
But so we've always, like, one of the things that we do is mergers and acquisitions. Mm-hmm. And so as we do that, most of the time they're fairly simple because they're really geared around rights to receive revenue. Mm-hmm. But as technology becomes increasingly bigger in our space, that is actually becoming the primary asset that goes along with the revenue. Mm-hmm. And generally speaking, most of the people in our industry historically have not been technology people.
Yes.
I think it's being populated now much more by technology people.
Rapidly, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but what I thought was fascinating, and I've actually sent you other people, and mm-hmm. I know that you've done work for them and mm-hmm. and actually saved them from maybe going down a road that they shouldn't have gone down.
Yes.
With particular transactions.
Thank you again for that. Yes.
Of course. Yeah. But I now see this as something that's really needed in the M&A space. Mm-hmm. How have you seen kind of your role first getting into these types of transactions that are more around payments? Mm-hmm. But then in general, like, is this part of Traceless? And on top of that, is it solely around, obviously probably not around the payment ecosystem, but like, where does your need come in and how?
Okay, so that's a great question. It's probably, there's going to be a relatively long answer here.
That's okay, man.
But I guess, to completely back up, I got involved, from Northern California. I got involved in technology in the early 90s in high school. A bunch of my friends were hackers, and we did a bunch of stuff that you probably shouldn't do. But I learned about technology very early on. And then when I went to UCSD, I did sort of a hybrid program. I did music, but then I also, because it was a part of the curriculum, took a bunch of computer science classes, and this is right around the turn of the century, and the writing was on the wall. The internet was basically going to be a part of everything. It's just like a kind of a given. And so I sort of, I have a really funny relationship with technology. I went to art school after that, and just kind of bopped around, moved to New York. But at a certain point, really recognized that it was going to start to affect everything. And so completely, I think the sort of common theme within my career is that I've been extremely lucky to be around very smart people and just be adjacent to them. And so I got the opportunity to be the CTO of a company called The Social Edge. I was like sort of cold called by this guy named Lorenzo Tione. Brilliant founder. He founded a company called PowerSet. He sold that to Microsoft, I think in like 2008 or 2009. He has a PhD in AI from U of T, I think, if I remember correctly. And he was just like, hey, I just have this weird thing. I interviewed for another random job, and one of his friends interviewed me, and I sort of understood that I was a generalist, and I have a really, like, I love technology. I've also been a teacher, but I've been in this kind of like hybrid spot where I've had to explain technology to people sometimes who don't understand it or who are in the process of learning to understand it. And that was sort of one of the criteria that Lorenzo wanted. And so we scaled that company from 4 people to 40. At our peak, we were doing 10 million a year. It was incredible. It was fantastic. And so then after that, so I was a CTO.
That's actually like that, watching that like scale and watching an organization go from a closet to like an actual organization.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
like
that's huge.
Two people literally sitting in like a spare bedroom, like in, on 7th Avenue in the mid 50s, to, like just editing everything on spreadsheets to like we built custom software in house for the app, for the team. We scaled out, the engineering organization to like 9. It was so much fun. I learned so much. There was also the other person that I have to give a shout out to was Steve Dameron, who was our COO. He was employee number 275 at Sun Microsystems.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so he was there. He was at Sun from like, that number to they scaled to about 20,000 people. So he has so much experience in that space. It's amazing. Anyway, long story short, that was the first time I was a CTO, and the really enjoyable experience there for me was just watching people and talking to them and making sure that technology supported them in their job roles and in their lives in terms of what they were trying to do. And so that through that business, I met Gene Reich, who's now my Gene Rich, who's my that's always the way I have to say it that way to Siri, because otherwise she won't let me text him. So Gene Rich was the founder of a company called Point, and they when the company scaled at a certain point, he runs a managed service provider, and so at a certain point I decided that I didn't want to just reset people's emails all day, and so we hired them, and they came in and did an amazing job, and so that's how we met. And after that, he started to reach out to me every now and again and say, hey, I have a client that is interested in doing an acquisition, but they don't have anyone in-house, like on either side, that is able to actually like, audit the technology.
And most of the time, like at least what I've seen, in that one transaction and then others, it's stuff that's been designed internally that doesn't necessarily, it hasn't been well thought out.
You have no idea, right?
Yeah, totally. Like you build something and then you build upon it some more, and then you have to change something over here that causes 5 disruptions over here.
Exactly.
Yeah, and there's not like a comprehensive thought to the architecture of it.
Exactly.
And so as you're trying to troubleshoot, it like freaks out.
A lot of times, companies will have technical employees, and if they have the right initiative, they'll just start building software for in-house for the company. This was Steve Jobs' vision in like the early 90s. If you go back and you watch him, he talks about apps like really early on. And the whole idea is that, software is malleable and flexible. And so it's natural that companies are going to start to build internal tooling that helps them get the job done. And then there's also, then naturally as things sort of, as spaces emerge where there's software often purchased, you're going to need people to help you, sort of integrate that kind of stuff, right? And so, so in that instance, and sort of how that, I realized that my background would benefit that is just essentially just to go into a situation. I'm constantly auditing software for my own company. I'm constantly looking at software vendors, looking at really like simple libraries and saying, okay, is this going to break in 2 years? Is this well maintained? Is it secure? Like, is the output or the format of this, whatever the data is or whatever it's actually doing, is that going to be immediately usable by the people that are using it, right? Is it going to work?
Yeah.
And so the few projects that we've done together and all the projects that I did sort of leading up to it, that was the question that I had to answer. And I completely backed into this, right? Because this is, this, what you just said about sort of, like someone built something from the inside and you have no idea how it works, that scales all the way up to the big leagues, right? There are software acquisitions that have happened in the last 10 years where, I mean, I won't name any names, but there have been instances where like an absolute top of the top software company purchased another unicorn, maybe even decacorn, and said, sure, okay, well, part of what we're going to do is we're going to migrate like your entire infrastructure from one cloud to another, and then just failed.
Yeah.
And just said, okay, we actually can't do that because it's so difficult to have X-ray vision and like look into what's actually going on.
Well, I was gonna say, how can you prospectively stress test stuff like that? Like, because to me, like you can see it, you can see where it's been built, but then like projecting as to like what it's gonna do or what you may need to do to get it to like a new generation. Like, is that something that you're focused on as well?
Well, I mean, so interesting. This is something that AI is making easier. We can get into that if you want, but there's like that's a whole area where it is helping things. But I think it's very, very hard for even like very, very good people to anticipate that. This is the reason why this type of work, this type of consulting work, is often given to the big four. Like this is like capital C consulting stuff. So it's like if you have two companies that are going to really take this seriously in terms of doing a merger at a software level, you're going to want a BCG or a McKinsey to come in and have someone who is, like a team of technical people to say, okay, cool, we're going to help you get through this. You're going to pay us an ungodly amount of money.
Yeah.
and
no, it's true.
Yeah.
It's true.
And what we're going to do is we're going to help you literally take the plugs and say, okay, here's the inlet, here's the outlet, boom, put them together.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, and shepherd you through the process over the course of 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
Right?
And that's the interesting part. Like operationally, I find that to be fairly easy, right? I mean, cultures don't always mix and match.
That's an X factor, right?
Right, but you can kind of see, and then you can see how things are architected. But then now with the advent of technology, and I would say like when you look at people who use technology versus no technology, it's kind of like cars, right? Today in today's day, maybe not back in historically because cars were much more.
They were simple,
simple and able to be worked on by a common person. Today with technology. Can't work on your car,
exactly,
right? But I consider all technology kind of like this to a certain degree. Like, I can't open up my computer and I can look at it and kind of recognize what's in there.
Yeah,
but I have no idea, right? Like,
totally. The one thing that is, the I would say one of the most unsung heroes, even though a lot of people are obviously huge proponents of how this has gotten easier, is the fact that so much of the internet and so much of what people use day to day is now open source, or like the entire internet's built on open source. Every single company that is that has made a splash in the last 10 years as a startup, as like a unicorn, fundamentally is like wildly dependent on open source. And that is one thing that where you can start to trust more and more. When a small company says, okay, well, we're gonna build XYZ, they're gonna do so probably out of like what's close at hand. Those are gonna be relatively accessible, vetted libraries, typically, right? And that as that pattern gets more common, as that sort of muscle gets built across culture, across industry, it does get easier to say, okay, this is how I can do my job. Like I can airdrop into an organization with an engineering team of 20 people. And I can say, just give me the checklist of what your stack is, right? I can say like, and they'll say, okay, we're on AWS, we use Dynamo, we use Lambda, we use 3 or 4 other things. It's usually just alphabet soup, right? But out of that, you'll be able to say, okay, cool, I can understand how each of those things, sort of ties together. All the things I just mentioned are not open source, but they're all based on open source.
Yeah, so that's the thing. It's foundational. I only see it from the perspective of doing disclosure schedules. And so when we get to the reps and warranties and we get into technology, this is where I've kind of seen like this broken out.
Yes.
Not in a format that I necessarily understand, but in a way where I see that the architecture of what's been built a lot of times is just bootstrapped to something that was starting point, you know?
For sure. And I think I have another good friend who was sort of a friend of that company, who is a incredible CTO. He sold his company relatively recently for, I think, something like 125, something like that. And he would always say, like, he was sort of my mentor while I was there. And he would always say, he would say, no matter what anyone says, it's all just like gum and dental floss and duct tape. Everything is just
baling wire.
No matter what anyone says, you're going to get people coming at you being like, this is all perfect. We do this, and it makes me feel better because I do think that there's a lot, there's obviously like sort of there's a range there. But yeah, I mean, I think to your point about sort of the, how you describe risk to the buyer, that is like one of the harder things about doing this type of like reporting and sort of like investigatory work is like, it's really different. It's like this.
Well, it's imperfect, right?
Yeah,
I mean, it's inherently imperfect.
Yes.
Like what you're actually. I mean, there's no predictability. Well, there's less predictability for what you're analyzing. So it's kind of hard from that perspective.
Yes.
But I think what's helpful about what you do is, if you're gonna buy, the warts.
Yes.
It's kind of like your Carfax. I'm gonna go back to a car analogy, but you're somewhat like Carfax because you're like going in and you're looking at it and you're like, yeah, this could be a potential problem. And the cool part is when you did it, you had like a grading scale of like, here's how good I feel about this. Like this could be a problem. I thought that was cool to try to put it into optics that people could kind of digest and analyze from that perspective where, you're doing the detailed work and they're like taking it in, but it's in a usable format.
You have to give people something that's in a consumable format. That comes from, cybersecurity. That comes from like, there's a lot of different mechanisms within cybersecurity in terms of rating vulnerabilities, and, trying to, really quickly just give someone a top line understanding of like what the risk is and like the context of the risk. So yeah, I think that stuff comes naturally just because that's a part of like what I have to do. And
it's interesting because, this was what I thought our podcast was really going to be about because this has been my experience with you.
Yeah.
But then as we sat down earlier, and I see that it's being a subset of Traceless, but tell us about the genesis of Traceless and then what Traceless does, because I think what Traceless does is a larger general context of what you were doing specifically when we were working on transactions.
Exactly. Yeah. So I do not have a formal cybersecurity background, but I've been dealing with the internet for a long time, and the internet is made out of Swiss cheese. That's like one of my sort of maxims that I always say. I think a lot of people say that. And so throughout my time just building websites, trying to hack MySpace when that was a thing.
What was the guy's name that he was your friend? He was your Tom. He was your first friend. I'm like, who's Tom?
Right, yeah. Exactly.
Totally.
But
where's the chicks?
So I mean, basically throughout my entire time dealing with technology, it's just like that has been a continuous kind of background awareness, and so it kind of culminated at a certain point I realized, okay, once for my next startup, I think I'm probably going to do a cybersecurity startup, because that is you have different types of risk, and in terms of these acquisitions, what I'm trying to do with the buyer and also the seller, just in terms of you do a little bit of therapy, right? You're going and you're talking to someone, they're trying to get their company sold, and you're like, okay, maybe you don't know all of the potential problems that are happening with your company. And so you want to think about you try to contextualize the different liabilities. One of the biggest liabilities at this point is, just cyber risk. And so that's sort of the genesis of Traceless came out of that.
So that's a term that I think it would be beneficial for all of our listeners to actually unpack, right? I mean, to me, like you're saying cyber risk or cybersecurity, break that down. I mean, break down cyber risk, because I don't think a lot of people it's just a term.
Of course. I mean, and that's the problem, is that it's vulnerabilities on the internet and cybersecurity is now it's moved so quickly, it's expanded so quickly, but this is also because, the internet has expanded, adoption of the internet has expanded really quickly. So cyber risk is essentially the risk that if you're using a tool, like let's just say specific within the context of an acquisition, cyber risk is essentially you're using something that is wildly out of date, has noted vulnerabilities, like you're using a piece of software that essentially has a backdoor, let's just say, right? And so we always talk about securing the house, right? It's a really simple metaphor. And so most people that run businesses really don't want to think about cyber risk. They don't want to think about technical risk in general, because most of them don't really want to think about technology. They just want to run their business, which is a completely normal and like natural desire. It's challenging because technology has become progressively
It's central.
more and more central, more and more complex, and
integrated. I mean, look,
expected, right?
For me, for sure, because like I've got people working on 3 or 4 systems, from accounting to ops and I want those to talk to one another. Jeremy works on his own marketing system with HubSpot, and we just found out that HubSpot is integratable with our
CRM,
yeah, our actual CRM that we use for law firm operations.
That's great. Yeah.
And totally, because look, I'm not looking to replace people, but I'm looking to automate as much as possible.
Exactly.
Because if you do the setup right, the automation will automatically just create product that is, to me, if it's done correctly, the end result will be correct, and I can rely on it. Right?
Yeah.
So like, and I tangent, and you just said something that really like, I thought about, because most of what we use today is web-based. So I could see how the internet would be more integral in how security comes through with that. But then a lot of the other parts of it are, how much am I supposed to rely on the software provider that I'm accessing through the internet beyond user permissions to know that I'm protected? Or, I mean, this is something that I don't even know necessarily on a contract basis, but how much reliance can I put? And I had somebody from West say this to me once.
Okay.
We used to have, because all of the data that we operate in, it's PII, it's PCI.
Yes.
If I wanted to commit identity theft, I could have a million times over, because I have so much information.
Yes.
Well, when we started the firm, we had a physical server. And that physical server, I had a whole bunch of lines of protection. I knew where it was, right? And then
You have a lock on the door.
that's right. And then we talked to West, and there was some sort of web-based application that they were trying to sell us. And I was like, well, what about data integrity and security? And the guy kind of laughed at me. And he's like, look, this is what we do. He's like, I am sure that what I'm doing, you'll be more secure with me than you will be on your own.
Yes.
And I said, you know what? That's a really valid point. I appreciate what you just said. But at the same time, how much reliance as a user of business software can I have when we're talking about cybersecurity?
That is a great question, and that is a virtually impossible to answer question, because of the various sort of the composition of like what your company is and what you do can change from industry to industry. The vendors that you're dependent on can
Dropbox. Everybody rolls with Dropbox.
Yes.
Okay, so I've got user permissions for people in Dropbox.
Yes.
I know that there's a lot of ways for people to infiltrate. It could be through my wireless router. It could be through all sorts of ways that somebody could get into us.
Yeah.
But like Dropbox, like so widely used, if I put something in it and I don't screw up,
what are the chances that they screw up?
Yeah.
Great question. They're not necessarily likely, but this is where, I guess this is another thing we could talk about that is so complicated about cybersecurity. Cyber risk is, so part of what we do at Traceless, I'll give you the elevator pitch in a minute, but basically part of what we do at Traceless is on-demand identity verification, right? So Traceless is essentially real-time protection of data and identity.
So like two-factor authentication, that type of thing? Or?
Exactly. Yeah. But specifically for data, and specifically in specific contexts where you're doing transactions with either your customer or like a business partner, employee, like that kind of thing. what's crazy about the way the internet works and sort of the cognitive dissonance that we have to deal with is that, to your point about Dropbox, on one hand, you still can have someone pick up the phone, call someone else, and say that they are a different person and immediately have the trust of that other person, right? So this happened with MGM in 2023. The Jaguar attack that just happened cost Jaguar approximately £2 billion in like lost revenue.
Wow.
And
Wow.
like they had to get a government bailout. This happened like a couple months ago, or maybe a month and a half ago.
What happened,
The car
Peter?
manufacturer.
The car manufacturer.
Can you tell our audience what happened?
I didn't hear about this.
So there's the details always get blurred by PR, by the company themselves. And in some cases because there's the fog of war that they actually don't understand what happened. But if I remember correctly, in this instance, this is the same group that went after Marks and Spencer and MGM in 2023. A really common tactic that they use is, they just call into the help desk. They call in and they say, or they call into the internal IT desk and they say, I'm so and so, I work for you. I need to reset my password, or I need to do whatever, right? So you have that on one side.
Yeah.
You have that action, which is so simple, on one side. And then on the other side, you have like a nation state. You have someone who is like worked on a Microsoft 0 day for 5 years. Like what that means is they know a vulnerability that exists like baseline within Microsoft's cloud infrastructure that nobody else knows about, right? Those things are actual pure gold in terms of the hacker community, right? Because it means that you can go do something that no one is expecting you to do and just get in. So
Wow.
it's so crazy, right? So we have this continuum where you are trying to defend against a 17-year-old who's just like being a clown, like prank calling.
Has no perspective necessarily on the world.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Like,
Yeah.
What his actions could produce.
You could have someone prank call you and bring down your business, all the way to you could have a cloud provider like Microsoft, like Google, and AWS. They all have had 0 days. They've all have had instances where they were sitting on they have a castle. It's got 1,000 doors, and one of them is just unlocked.
Yeah.
And they don't know it, right? And you have someone who has the time and the sophistication to kind of like navigate that process to go get something that they want, right?
But here's a random question.
Sure.
Does AI help them in that process?
Wow.
This is a really, really common point of discussion these days, and it's very interesting. It is I guess you could call it a war of attrition, but it helps both sides.
Okay.
Right.
So, if I'm a hacker out there and because I think that looking at that perspective is relevant to the conversation that we're having.
Yeah.
Are they able to use the tools that are like coming into the marketplace?
100%.
Yeah, and
100%.
they probably have more sophisticated tools than we're going to have as consumers.
One refrain that I think is going to be useful probably for the next few years is that AI is as good as you are. So
I agree. It's software. It's like software, garbage in, garbage out.
Exactly.
I agree. If you teach AI, and you have particular outcomes that you're looking for,
yes,
and you work it and train it, 100%. I think it's an unbelievable tool.
Yeah. So if you have someone that has, if you think about, like AI is essentially it's memorize the internet, right?
Yeah.
And so if you have someone who is like like an organic chemist that has like a PhD in like bioorganic chemistry or whatever, right? They can sit down with ChatGPT and have some really interesting conversations. They can probably use it to push their research forward. They can probably, have it help them think about some areas that they didn't necessarily think about before.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Payments Experts Podcast, a podcast of Global Legal Law Firm. Visit us online today at globallegallawfirm.com. Matters discussed are all opinions and do not constitute legal advice. All events or likeness to real people and events is a coincidence.